Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Valentin Mandakin, the architectural historian, and I would like to make a presentation about my projected Romanian History podcast. Its launch. I'm planning to launch it sometimes at the end of this month with an introduction, and then this one will unfold over a number of months, hopefully years, and to cover the history of the lands inhabited by the Romanian communities and obviously the other communities living in this territory in connection with the wider history in Southeast Europe, Europe in general, and the rest of Eurasia. How I'm planning to do this enterprise? First of all, why I want to do it. As you know, I am an architectural historian focused on Southeast Europe, the architectural history of Southeast Europe, which is a subject, in my opinion, not really specialized just on buildings. A building is a big enterprise, and behind it is economic history, social history, even science of materials, geology, climate. So it's a holistic kind of speciality, if I can put it that way. You have to combine many fields of studies in order to have an idea about architectural history. And being in Southeast Europe, focused on Romania, where I'm based, and myself, I've been born and raised here, educated later on the other end of Europe in England, in Britain. So I feel the need of getting into the nitty-gritty of the history of this part of Europe. Southeast Europe, its northern part, which are mostly the Romanian lands of Southeast Europe, the northern half of Southeast Europe, which from my activity so far, which spans for about 2 decades, even more, I noticed that it's not very well known by the wider public in the world. When they speak about Romania, many of them confused what is that, which part of Europe. Some of them are quite aware of it. But the history of the Romanians and the Romanian lands and how this process goes in connection with the other communities around in a larger context is really, really poor. So I want to address this situation in order to make better understood the evolution of architecture history in this part of the world. Southeast Europe focused on the northern part of Southeast Europe, which are mostly the Romanian lands. Podcasts are very popular right now. There are many podcasts around in a diversity of themes, including history. Myself, I'm a fan of many of them, like the Romanian History podcast, Byzantine History podcast, for example. It's not much on the Romanian history either. So it's another problem, even in this kind of niche, which is now developing, exploding nearly of the podcast, is not much on it. And what it is the usual kind of approach. The nationalist one, very formal one, based on dates, on events, and also very much personality based, on princes, on battles, on things like that. And in my opinion, we need a completely different approach when it's about the Romanian lands, the Romanian communities, this part of Europe in general. Because here we don't have properly recorded history, especially among the Romanians. The Romanian history is not properly recorded. Only about 150 years ago started to be properly recorded. So very sparse news from the past about Romania. So it needs a completely different approach, which has to bring into play things like anthropology, geohistory, environment, the history of environment, the history of climate, for example. These things will will enlighten us much better about the history of the Romanians than chronicles, documents, which comparing with what is going on in a place like France, for example, or even Hungary, which is awash with this kind of documents, here we don't have them, so we have to recourse to some other methods, which are equally interesting in my opinion. They are not well versed in this part of the world, and that will give you probably a better view about this history. Because as I said, usually people who are engaging in publicizing the Romanian history through books, articles, and now podcasts are having this kind of narrow view, nationalist one, which is, Romanian nations, that, and this is extraordinary. This is politics, work being based on some kind of conventional data and personalities, which are not many around, and they do not give you the full picture. So, this Romanian History podcast, I envisage it to go in, let's say, in a few series of huge chapters in this history. So this series will consist of episodes, and altogether this series I plan to be anything between 30 and 60 episodes. So 30, 60 episodes. Once per month. Now, one of my approaches in production of this episode is flexibility. When I say 30, 60 episodes, could be less, could be more than 60s, could be once per month, it could be twice or even more per month, depending on my productivity and what I'm doing in that period. Or sometimes, if I'm too busy, they can go a bit over this kind of limit. So the idea is flexibility, but I'll give you how I am envisaging it. The durations of these episodes could be anything between 30 and let's say 55 minutes, not 1 hour, 55 minutes. How are they going to be spread around the news? How are you going to find out, to listen to it, to watch it? It's going to be a kind of dual approach. I will record them first, and I'll put them on different media. And I would like this podcast to be equally audio and video. So I'll produce audio and video, which is quite a lot of work for that. That's why I'm thinking about once per month to do it. And whoever likes to listen to audio will have equal kind of comprehension as the one who will watch it on video, or you will have a bit more field of view, let's put it that way, because you will be able to see maps or schemes and so on and so forth. But for the informed people, audio would be good enough. This production, and all of this audio and video have to be recorded and produced on certain tools. Let's say logistics, I put here. What are my logistics? Because you probably are aware that you can produce a podcast with very simple materials. You need your mobile phone, smartphone, even without a microphone, and you can just podcast straight away. But we want to do something of real good technical quality at the disposal of a normal means person. Logistics would be a good microphone, which probably some of you know about it from my video recordings, which is going to be recorded digitally on my computer. All of this, the images which are going to be recorded either with a high-resolution camera, a standalone camera, or via the iPhone, which I have an X-Max iPhone, one of the larger ones and with a huge resolution, a professional one really, I have to say that I want to record, or on the camera of my computer, which again I found that it's good enough for my purposes. It's quite a performing one on my MacBook, MacBook laptop. Apart from that, I would need a bit of studio space, which is here in my place, in my house in Bucharest, where, as you can see, that I have this screen, which makes a bit of an ambient. I have this kind of presentation board over here. The way how I'm recording now is via a microphone, which goes about 6 meters with the cord to the camera, so I can walk around a bit. I don't have enough space. I have a bit of a lamp to lead me better. Obviously, I will improve on them. And as I or develop my space. I have a loft space above, which slowly as I develop it, I can set up a much better studio right there. That depends also on the weather, because in the cold weather it's more difficult to make the video and audio recordings there. So that is about the logistics. Now let's see how I'm going to, what kind of methodology I'm going to pursue in this the production of this podcast. Let's clean up the board. See that even this thing is quite nice. How it's done. As I said at the beginning of this video, this live podcast, my methodology is going to be quite radically different from what you are used about the history in general. Is, let's say, a more holistic approach. That is also because of my background. I'm not a strict historian professionally. I'm a bunch of professions myself, how I consider myself a bit polyvalent. Probably some of you, a few of you know about my background. I started my professional life in the Air Forces as a student here in Romania. That was in the communist times, so that was quite high level technical education. I had to give it up because I couldn't get on with that kind of life, and also it was in communism. And I went to Earth Sciences at the University of Bucharest, where I pursued geology, going all over Romania, and studying the geology of Romania and Southeast Europe, Europe in general, specializing myself in geophysics. It's about magnetism, about earthquakes. I worked in this field in London at a French company, with some of the best and largest computers in the world at that time, Cray supercomputers, which were in the American US Army had then to guide their ballistic missiles, another kind of missiles. That was the power of the computers at that time when I used to work there. So very high qualified job, high-tech job. From there, I went to the University of London, where initially I specialized in a postgraduate diploma in economics at Birkbeck College. From there, I jumped to the London School of Economics, where I pursued a very high-quality master's degree in Russians and post-Soviet studies. About this area which I'm studying, Russian and post-Soviet studies, was about Eastern Europe and Northern Eurasia, exactly my piece of specialty. And from there, I was lucky enough to obtain one of the most prestigious British scholarship of the Economic and Research Council scholarship to pursue doctoral studies, which I did them in the fields of identity, national identity, where I looked at different categories of identities, from political ones to cultural ones, and I was very curious about the identities, architectural identities. My area of studies was what is now the Republic of Moldova, or Bessarabia in the Russian Empire style. So a Romanian community, Romanian-speaking community. And from there, I enlarged my area of study and specialty as the years passed by. That was in the mid-1990s, early 2000s. Now we are 20 years later, to the entire southeast of Europe. So as you can see that I have a kind of natural sciences, technical background, economics, history, politics. All of this together is my approach, even for the Romanian History podcast. So this is going to be the methodology of my podcast, which is going to unfold on a number of months and even years. What about the overview, the structure of my podcast? I want to have it quite simple in a way, to follow a logical kind of flowing. The first episodes will be concerned with the natural foundation. So I'll put here one natural foundations. Where I'll be looking at the lands of this area, of the Northern Balkans, of the northern part of Southeast Europe. And here I'll be looking at how this land is made up. Its geology. It's very important, geology. People cultivate the lands where they have a soil, where they quarry, if they live in the mountains. They live on the proceeds from the oil exports. For example, in Romania, it's very important, the oil historically. Why is that? And the geology of it. And how they build the houses, the fortresses, what kind of stone they use. So these things will be the geological formation of the Romanian lands. Also, I'll be looking at the landscape, how the landscape was formed here, and its importance for the local history, how it conditions the history of the local communities. And also, I'll be looking, unlike many other people concerned with this area, researchers and commentators, I'll look at climate history. The climate history for communities like Romanians is, again, extremely important, really determinant, I would say. Romanians do not have a state machine in their history, so they depend very much on their land, on the way how they cultivate it, or their flocks of sheep, or things like that. All of these things are conditions in a very large degree by climate. So imagine if you have dry periods, if you have wet periods, if you have pandemics, plagues, viruses, as we have now, they're extremely important in the local history. So this is going to be one of my novel approaches for you. And from here, we'll go to the deep history of this land. I'll call it, in ancient times, civilization and barbarism, or barbarism and civilization, better say. Why is that? Again, it's a dark page of history was going on here in ancient times, up until the Greek classical times, for example, when the Roman Empire emerged as the conqueror of this area. Even a well-known author like Neil Aitchison's, he titled his book Black Sea, the Civilization of Barbarism, and the ages of it. So it's very appropriate to look from, again, to this kind of holistic view of the local history. Here we'll look about the first human communities, how they developed later on in 500 BC, in the time of Herodotus, later on, for example, in the Dacian states, in the Dacian kingdom, how it clashed with the Romans, and then the Romanization process, and so on and so forth, so bringing it to civilization. Then we'll jump to the late antiquity and the Middle Ages, and this is what they call the Dark Ages. And again, these ages are even darker than in the ancient times, I have to say. It's a blank area practically in the regions where are now the Romanian communities. So I'll put it in the dark. Again, methods like climate history, historical geography are very important to realize what is going on here, and also to look in the context of it. So you have to look at the better known histories of other communities around, like the Hungarian one, but especially the Bulgarian one, which influenced in that period in a great degree the Romanian communities. Then you have Romania suddenly emerging into the history, and that is in the Middle Ages, in the High Middle Ages. That is 14th century Romania, first Romanian principalities emerged quite late. The thing is that basically the latest significant people of Europe, which emerges so late in history, and that is the Carpathian principalities. I would call this series. Principalities. And that we have more recorded history here. This is going to be a bit more classical, but again, we have again to look at the climate history and a lot of pandemics which influenced this period. Then we have a very well recorded period of the national state, emergence of the national state. And then the last one of the series, sixth one, I'll call it 60 years of dictatorships. from the royal dictatorship in the 1930s up until the end of communism, with the first democratic government elected in 1996. So 60 years of dictatorships. We are still living in the aftermath of it. So we are not really sure if Romania will reverse or Romania will reverse to dictatorship or not. It depends very much on the situation in the world, and what's going on now in the American elections is a matter of hope for the future here in this part of the world. So that is going to be my structure. How I'm going to record this, to shoot them and then to publicize them. I told you about my logistics. I have quite good quality camera, photo camera, which can also record high resolution films. Also, I have this iPhone, which is I'm very happy with it, and all of these things will be processed on my computers, having this video processing software packages and also audio processing. They will. The final product, the podcast itself, is going to be put on a diversity of platforms. First of all, on Facebook, on my blog, valentinandacci.com, I have created or allocated a name on a blog, on a webpage for it. It's Romanian History Podcast, .wordpress.com. It's an WordPress page. Also, Facebook page called Romanian History Podcast. You can just search for it. And there will be all over there. Also, there will be on YouTube and through on the specialized podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, for example, the Google ones, the Google ones, places like Spotify, if I can do that, or some other similar kind of platforms. So there will be plenty of places to find out about it. How I'm going to film it in a way, or to put it together. I'm trying to make it not static, like recording it from a room, from a home studio like this one. I will try to go out in the field from time to time to show, better illustrate an episode. For example, if I speak about the urbanization of the mid-19th century, I may go to one of the new towns of that period and show you around in that recording. Or if I speak about geology, well, the thing has to be next to mountains. So I will try my best in that regard. Well, you say it's very nice for you to do this kind of things, to spread the word about the local history here in Romania, to better understand the architectural history phenomenon. And very nice of you doing that thing. That it's a huge charity what you're doing, you may ask yourself. Of course, I have to sustain myself. You know that I'm sustaining myself through tours, courses, consulting people who want to renovate their house, restore their house, and a array of educative kind of activities which are remunerated according to the circumstance, depending how big is the effort, the involvement in that kind of project, how long it takes, and so on and so forth. This one is quite a time-consuming, energy-consuming, intellectual-consuming project. I'm going to finance it. Because it's my opinion, in order to go to those up to 60 or even more, if that's possible, episodes over a number of years, in my opinion, it must be self-financed at a point or another. So I plan broadcasting a few episodes for free. And then I'll put them a kind of under lock, will be unlocked for a fee, or if you want to give a minimal kind of donation for it, and then you can donate as much as you like. And they will be going on a platform like Patreon, for example, or Zoom, or so on and so forth. These ones will be unlocked for a fee, which will contribute to the production and my self-sustaining, my life, daily life in this activity. And there will be many other stream revenues, in my opinion. They will emerge as I will develop the podcast. So this is my idea, my great scheme of things. I envisage to make the introduction before going to the natural foundation of this series at the end of this month, November, toward the end of it, beginning of December. the first proper episode just before the end of the year in December 2020, and then to go with it as as I have enough health, resources, energy. So hopefully we'll go through all of it together. So it's going to be quite an adventure. So please keep up on me, and I'm relying with you for your emotional sustaining, for your comments, for your ideas, criticism, and of course for your contributions regarding donating for this activity. Of course, if you like it, there's not an obligation for that. But if you like it to go on, that it's another important aspect of it. So I hope that you found interesting this presentation. I'm looking forward to see you in this format in about 2 weeks' time with the introduction, and then we'll fire away the episodes from this great project. Thank you. I'm Valentin Mandaci, the architectural historian, focused on Southeast Europe and even more focused on Romania, where I am based. And I presented here the idea of launching of the Romanian History podcast. Thank you and goodbye.